Chapter 23 of The Plastic Age by Percy Marks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. For several days Hugh was tortured by doubt and indecision. There were times when he thought that he loved Cynthia, times when he was sure that he didn't. When he had just about made up his mind that he hated her, he found himself planning to follow her to New Rochelle. He tried to persuade himself that his conduct was no more reprehensible than that of his comrades, but shame invariably overwhelmed his arguments. There were hours when he ached for Cynthia and hours when he loathed her for smashing something that had been beautiful. Most of all, he wanted comfort, advice, but he knew no one to whom he was willing to give his confidence. Somehow he couldn't admit his drunkenness to anyone whose advice he valued. He called on Professor Henley twice, intending to make a clean breast of his transgressions. Henley, he knew, would not lecture him, but when he found himself facing him, he could not bring himself to confession. He was afraid of losing Henley's respect. Finally, in desperation, he talked to Norry. Not because he thought Norry could help him, but because he had to talk to somebody, and Norry already knew the worst. They went walking far out into the country, idly discussing campus gossip, or pausing to revel in the beauty of the night, the clear, clean sky, the pale moon, the fireflies sparkling suddenly over the meadows or even to the treetops. Weary from their long walk, they sat down on a stump, and Hugh let the dam of his emotion break. "Norry," he began intensely, "I'm in hell. In hell. It's a week since prom, and I haven't had a line from Cynthia. I haven't dared write to her." "Why not?" She, oh, damn it, she told me before she left that everything was all off. That's why she left early. She said that we didn't love each other, that all we felt was sex attraction. I don't know whether she's right or not, but I miss her like the devil. I feel empty, sort of hollow inside, as if everything had suddenly been poured out of me, and there's nothing to take its place. I was full of Cynthia, you see, and now there's no Cynthia. There's nothing left but, oh God, Norry, I'm ashamed of myself. I feel dirty." The last word was hardly audible. Norry touched his arm. "I know, Hugh, and I'm awfully sorry. I think, though, that Cynthia was right. I know her better than you do. She's an awfully good kid, but not your kind at all. I think I feel as badly almost as you do about it." He paused a moment and then said simply, "I was so proud of you, Hugh." "Don't," Hugh exclaimed. "I want to kill myself when you say things like that. You don't understand. I know that you don't understand. I've been doing a lot of thinking since prom, too. I've thought over a lot of things that you've said to me. About me, I mean. Why, Hugh, you think I'm not human. I don't believe you think I have passions like the rest of you. Well, I do, and sometimes it's awful. I'm telling you that so you'll understand that I know how you feel. But love's beautiful to me, Hugh, the most wonderful thing in the world. I was in love with a girl once, and I know. She didn't give a hang for me. She thought I was a baby. I suffered awfully, but I know that my love was beautiful as..." He looked around for a simile. "As tonight. I think it's because of that I hate mugging and petting and that sort of thing. I don't want beauty debased. I want to fight when orchestras jazz famous arias. Well, petting is jazzing love, and I hate it. Do you see what I mean?" Hugh looked at him wonderingly. He didn't know this Norry at all. "Yes," he said slowly. "Yes, I see what you mean. I think I do anyway. But what has it to do with me?" "Well, I know most of the fellows pet and all that sort of thing, and they don't think anything about it. But you're different. You love beautiful things as much as I do. You told me yourself that Jimmy Henley said last year that you were gifted. You can write and sing and run, but I've just realized that you aren't proud of those things at all. You just take them for granted. And you're ashamed that you write poetry. Some of your poems are good, but you haven't sent any of them to the poetry magazine. You don't want anybody to know that you write poetry. You're trying to make yourself like fellows that are inferior to you." Norry was piteously in earnest. His hero had crumbled into clay before his eyes, and he was trying to patch him together again, preparatory to boosting him back upon his pedestal. "Oh, cripes, Norry," Hugh said a little impatiently. "You exaggerate all my virtues. You always have. I'm not half the fellow you think I am. I do love beautiful things, but I don't believe my poetry is any good." He paused a moment and then confessed mournfully, "I'll admit, though, that I have been going downhill. I'm going to do better from now on. You watch me." They talked for hours, Norry embarrassing Hugh with the frankness of his admiration. Norry's hero worship had always embarrassed him, but he didn't like it when the worshiper began to criticize. He admitted the justness of the criticism, but it hurt him just the same. Perching on a pedestal had been uncomfortable, but a little thrilling. Sitting on the ground and gazing up at his perch was rather humiliating. The fall had bruised him, and Norry, with the best intentions in the world, was kicking the bruises. Nevertheless, he felt better after the talk, determined to win back Norry's esteem and his own. He swore off smoking and drinking and stuck to his oath. He told Vinton that if he brought any more liquor to their room, one of them was going to be carried out, and that he had a hunch that it would be Vinton. Vinton gazed at him with round eyes and believed him. After that, he did his drinking elsewhere, confiding to his cronies that Carver was on the wagon and that he had got as religious as holy hell. "He won't let me drink in my own room," he wailed dolorously. And then, with a sudden burst of clairvoyance, he added, "I guess his girl has given him the gate." For weeks the campus buzzed with talk about the prom. A dozen men who had been detected flagrante delicto were summarily expelled. Many others who had been equally guilty were in a constant state of mental gooseflesh. Would the next mail bring a summons from the dean? President Culver spoke sternly in chapel and hinted that there would be no prom the coming year. Most of the men said that the prom had been an awful brawl, but there were some who insisted that it was no worse than the proms held at other colleges, and recited startling tales in support of their argument. Leonard Gates finally settled the whole matter for Hugh. There had been many discussions in the Nu Delta living room about the prom, and in one of them Gates ended the argument with a sane and thoughtful statement. "The prom was a brawl," he said seriously, "a drunken brawl. We all admit that. The fact that proms at other colleges are brawls, too, doesn't make ours any more respectable. If a Yale man happens to commit murder and gets away with it, there is no reason that a Harvard man or a Sanford man should commit murder, too. Some of you are arguing like babies, but some of you are going to the other extreme. You talk as if everybody at the prom was lit. Well, I wasn't lit, and as a matter of fact, most of them weren't lit. Just use a little common sense. There were 350 couples at the prom. Now, not half of them even had a drink. Say that half did. That makes 175 fellows. If 50 of those fellows were really soused, I'll eat my hat. But we'll say that there were 50. 50 were quite enough to make the whole prom look like a longshoreman's ball. You've got to take the music into consideration, too. That orchestra could certainly play jazz. It could play it too damn well. Why, that music was enough to make a saint shed his halo and shake a shimmy. What I'm getting to is this. There are over 1,000 fellows in college, and out of that 1,000 not more than 50 were really soused at the prom, and not more than 175 were even a little teed. To go around saying that Sanford men are a lot of muckers just because a small fraction of them acted like gutter pups is sheer bunk. The prom was a drunken brawl, but all Sanford men aren't drunkards, not by a damn sight. Hugh had to admit the force of Gates' reasoning, and he found comfort in it. He had been just about ready to believe that all college men and Sanford men in particular were hardly better than common muckers, but in the end the comfort that he got was small. He realized bitterly that he was one of the minority that had disgraced his college. He was one of the gutter pups. The recognition of that undeniable fact cut deep. He was determined to redeem himself. He had to somehow. Living a life of perfect rectitude was not enough. He had to do something that would win back his own respect and the respect of his fellows, which he thought quite absurdly that he had forfeited. So far as he could see, there was only one way that he could justify his existence at Sanford. That was to win one of the dashes in the Sanford-Raleigh meet. He clung to that idea with the tenacity of a fanatic. He had nearly a month in which to train, and train he did as he never had before. His diet became a matter of the utmost importance. A rub-down was a holy rite, and the words of Jansen, the coach, divine gospel. He placed in both of the preliminary meets, but he knew that he could do better. He wasn't yet in condition. When the day for the Raleigh-Sanford meet finally came, he did not feel any of the nervousness that had spelled defeat for him in his freshman year. He was stonily calm, silently determined. He was going to place in the 100 and win the 220 or die in the attempt. No golden dreams of breaking records excited him. Calvert of Raleigh was running the 100 consistently in 10 seconds and had been credited with better time. Hugh had no hopes of defeating him in the 100, but there was a chance in the 220. Calvert was a short-distance man. The shorter, the better. 220 yards was a little too far for him. Calvert did not look like a runner. He was a good 2 inches shorter than Hugh, who lacked nearly that much of 6 feet. Calvert was heavily built, a dark, brawny chap, both quick and powerful. Hugh looked at him and for a moment hated him, although he did not phrase it so. In fact, he did not phrase it at all. Calvert was his obstacle in his race for redemption. Calvert won the 100-yard dash in 10 seconds flat, breaking the Sanford-Raleigh record. Hugh, running faster than he ever had in his life, barely managed to come in second ahead of his teammate Murphy. The Sanford men cheered him lustily, but he hardly listened. He had to win the 220. At last the runners were called to the starting line. They danced up and down the track, flexing their muscles. Hugh was tense, but more determined than nervous. Calvert pranced around easily. He seemed entirely recovered from his great effort in the 100. Finally, the starter called them to their marks. They tried their spikes in the starting holes, scraped them out a bit more, made a few trial dashes, and finally knelt in line at the command of the starter. Hugh expected Calvert to lead for the first 100 yards, but the last 100, that was where Calvert would weaken. Calvert was sure to be ahead at the beginning, but after that... On your marks. Set. The pistol cracked. The start was perfect, The 5 men leaped forward almost exactly together. For once, Calvert had not beaten the others off the mark, but he immediately drew ahead. He was running powerfully, his legs rising and falling in exact rhythm, his spikes tearing into the cinder path. But Hugh and Murphy were pressing him close. At the end of the first 100, Calvert led by a yard. Hugh pounded on, Murphy falling behind him. The others were hopelessly outclassed. Hugh did not think. He did not hear 1,000 men shouting hysterically, "Carver! Carver!" He saw nothing but Calvert a yard ahead of him. He knew nothing but that he had to make up that yard. Down the track they sped, their breath bursting from them, their hands clenched, their faces grotesquely distorted, their legs driving them splendidly on. Hugh was gaining. That yard was closing. He sensed it rather than saw it. He saw nothing now, not even Calvert. Blinded with effort, his lungs aching, his heart pounding terribly, he fought on, mechanically keeping between the 2 white lines. 10 yards from the tape, he was almost abreast of Calvert. He saw the tape through a red haze. He made a final valiant leap for it, but he never touched it. Calvert's chest had broken it a tiny fraction of a second before. Hugh almost collapsed after the race. 2 men caught him and carried him, despite his protests, to the dressing room. At first he was aware only of his overwhelming weariness. Something very important had happened. It was over, and he was tired, infinitely tired. A rub-down refreshed his muscles, but his spirit remained weary. For a month he had thought of nothing but that race. Even Cynthia had become strangely insignificant in comparison with it. And now that the race had been run and lost, his whole spirit sagged and drooped. He was pounded on the back. His hand was grasped and shaken until it ached. He was cheered to an echo by the thrilled Sanford men, but still his depression remained. He had won his letter. He had run a magnificent race. All Sanford sang his praise. Norry Parker had actually cried with excitement and delight, but he felt that he had failed. He had not justified himself. A few days later, he entered Henley's office, intending to make only a brief visit. Henley congratulated him. "You were wonderful, Hugh," he said enthusiastically. "The way that you crawled up on him the last 100 yards was thrilling. I shouted until I was hoarse. I never saw anyone fight more gamely. He's a faster man than you are, but you almost beat him. I congratulate you, excuse the word, please, on your guts." Somehow Hugh couldn't stand Henley's enthusiasm. Suddenly he blurted out the whole story, his drunkenness at the prom, his split with Cynthia. He did not mention the visit to Norry's room, his determination to redeem himself, his feeling that if he had won that race he would at least have justified his existence at the college, and finally his sense of failure. Henley listened sympathetically, amused and touched by the boy's naive philosophy. He did not tell him that the race was relatively unimportant. He was sure that Hugh would find that out for himself. But he did bring him comfort. "You did not fail, Hugh," he said gently. "You succeeded magnificently. As for serving your college, you can always serve it best by being yourself, being true to yourself, I mean. And that means being the very fine gentleman that you are." He paused a minute, aware that he must be less personal. Hugh was red to the hair and gazing unhappily at the floor. "You must read Browning," he went on, "and learn about his success in failure philosophy. He maintains that it is better to strive for 1,000,000 and miss it than to strive for 100 and get it. A man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? He says it in a dozen different ways. It's the man who tries bravely for something beyond his power that gets somewhere, the man who really succeeds. Well, you tried for something beyond your power, to beat Calvert, a really great runner. You tried to your utmost. Therefore, you succeeded. I admire your sense of failure. It means that you recognize an ideal. But I think that you succeeded. You may not have quite justified yourself to yourself, but you have proved capable of enduring a hard test bravely. You have no reason to be depressed, no reason to be ashamed." They talked for a long time, and finally Henley confessed that he thought Cynthia had been wise in taking herself out of Hugh's life. "I can see," he said, "that you aren't telling me quite all the story. I don't want you to either. I judge, however, from what you have said, that you went somewhere with her, and that only complete drunkenness saved you from disgracing both yourself and her. You need no lecture, I am sure. You are sufficiently contrite. I have a feeling that she was right about sexual attraction being paramount, and I think she is a very brave girl. I like the way she went home, and I like the way she has kept silent. Not many girls could or would do that. It takes courage. From what you have said, however, I imagine that she is not your kind. At least that she isn't the kind that is good for you. You have suffered and are suffering, I know, but I am sure that some day you are going to be very grateful to that girl, for a good many reasons." Hugh felt better after that talk, and the end of the term brought him a surprise that wiped out his depression and his sense of failure. He found, too, that his pain was growing less. The wound was healing. Perversely, he hated it for healing, and he poked it viciously to feel it throb. Agony had become sweet. It made life more intense, less beautiful perhaps, but more wonderful, more real. Romantically, too, he felt that he must be true both to his love and to his sorrow, and his love was fading into a memory that was plaintively gray, but shot with scarlet thrills, and his sorrow was bowing before the relentless excitement of his daily life. The surprise that rehabilitated him in his own respect was his election to the Boulé, the senior council and governing board of the student body. It was the greatest honor that an undergraduate could receive, and Hugh had in no way expected it. When Nu Delta had first suggested to him that he be a candidate, he had demurred, saying that there were other men in his delegation better fitted to serve and with better chances of election. Leonard Gates, however, felt otherwise, and before Hugh knew what had happened, he was a candidate along with 30 other juniors, only 12 of whom could be elected. He took no part in the campaigning, attended none of the caucuses, was hardly interested in the fraternity combine that promised to elect him. He did not believe that he could be elected. He saw no reason why he should be. As a matter of fact, as Gates and others well knew, his chances were more than good. Hugh was popular in his own right, and his great race in the Sanford Raleigh meet had made him something of a hero for the time being. Furthermore, he was a member of both the Glee and Banjo clubs. He had led his class in the spring sings for 3 years, and he had a respectable record in his studies. The tapping took place in chapel the last week of classes. After the first hymn, the retiring members of the Boulé rose and marched down the aisle to where the juniors were sitting. The new members were tapped in the order of the number of votes that they had received, and the first man tapped having received the largest number of votes, automatically became president of the Boulé for the coming year. Hugh's interest naturally picked up the day of the election, and he began to have faint hopes that he would be the 10th or 11th man. To his enormous surprise, he was tapped third, and he marched down the aisle to the front seat reserved for the new members with the applause of his fellows sweet in his ears. It didn't seem possible. He was one of the most popular and most respected men of his class. He could not understand it, but he didn't particularly care to understand it. The honor was enough. Nu Delta tried to heap further honors on him, but he declined them. As a member of Boulé, he was naturally nominated for the presidency of the chapter. Quite properly, he felt that he was not fitted for such a position, and he retired in favor of John Lawrence, the only man in his delegation really capable of controlling the brothers. Lawrence was a man like Gates. He would, Hugh knew, carry on the constructive work that Gates had so splendidly started. Nu Delta was in the throes of one of those changes so characteristic of fraternities. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of The Plastic Age by Percy Marks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Hugh spent his last college vacation at home, working on the farm, reading, occasionally dancing at Corley Lake, and thinking a great deal. He saw Janet Harton, now Janet Moffett, several times at the lake and wondered how he could ever have adored her. She was still childlike, still dainty and pretty, but to Hugh she was merely a talking doll, and he felt a little sorry for her burly, rather stupid husband, who lumbered about after her like a protecting watchdog. He met plenty of pretty girls at the lake, but as he said, he was off women for good. He was afraid of them. He had been severely burnt, and while the fire still fascinated him, it frightened him too. Women, he was sure, were shallow creatures, dangerous to a man's peace of mind and self-respect. They were all right to dance with and pet a bit, but that was all, absolutely all. He thought a lot about girls that summer and even more about his life after graduation from college. What was he going to do? Life stretched ahead of him for 1 year like a smooth-flowered plain, and then the abyss. He felt prepared to do nothing at all, and he was not swept by an overpowering desire to do anything in particular. Writing had the greatest appeal for him, but he doubted his ability. Teach? Perhaps. But teaching meant graduate work. Well, he would see what the next year at college would show. He was going to take a course in composition with Professor Henley, and if Henley thought his gifts warranted it, he would ask his father for a year or two of graduate work at Harvard. College was pleasant that year. It was pleasant to wear a blue sweater with an orange S on it. It was pleasant, too, to wear a small white hat that had a blue V on the crown, the insignia of the Boulé, and a sign that he was a person to be respected and obeyed. It was pleasant to be spoken to by the professors as one who had reached something approaching manhood. Life generally was pleasant, not so exciting as the 3 preceding years, but fuller and richer. Early in the first term he was elected to Helmet, an honor society that possessed a granite tomb, a small windowless building in which the members were supposed to discuss questions of great importance and practice secret rites of awe-inspiring wonder. As a matter of fact, the monthly meetings were nothing but bull-fests, or as one cynical member put it, "We wear a gold helmet on our sweaters and chew the fat once a month." True enough, but that gold helmet glittered enticingly in the eyes of every student who did not possess one. For the first time, Hugh's studies meant more to him than the undergraduate life. He had chosen his instructors carefully, having learned from 3 years of experience that the instructor was far more important than the title of the course. He had 3 classes in literature, one in music, partly because it was a snap and partly because he really wanted to know more about music, and his composition course with Henley, to him the most important of the lot. He really studied, and at the end of the first term received 3 A's and 2 B's, a very creditable record. What was more important than his record, however, was the fact that he was really enjoying his work. He was intellectually awakened and hungry for learning. Also, for the first time, he really enjoyed the fraternity. Jack Lawrence was proving an able president, and Nu Delta pledged a freshman delegation of which Hugh was genuinely proud. There were plenty of men in the chapter whom he did not like or to whom he was indifferent, but he had learned to ignore them and center his interest in those men whom he found congenial. The first term was ideal, but the second became a maelstrom of doubt and trouble in which he whirled madly around trying to find some philosophy that would solve his difficulties. When Norry returned to college after the Christmas vacation, he told Hugh that he had seen Cynthia. Naturally, Hugh was interested, and the mere mention of Cynthia's name was still enough to quicken his pulse. "How did she look?" he asked eagerly. "Awful." "What? What's the matter? Is she sick?" Norry shook his head. "No, I don't think she is exactly sick," he said gravely, "but something is the matter with her. You know, she has been going an awful pace, tearing around like crazy. I told you that, I know, when I came back in the fall. Well, she's kept it up, and I guess she's about all in. I couldn't understand it. Cynthia's always run with a fast bunch, but she's never had a bad name. She's beginning to get one now." "No." Hugh was honestly troubled. "What's the matter, anyway? Didn't you try to stop her?" Norry smiled. "Of course not. Can you imagine me stopping Cynthia from doing anything she wanted to do? But I did have a talk with her. She got hold of me one night at the country club and pulled me off in a corner. She wanted to talk about you." "Me?" Hugh's heart was beginning to pound. "What did she say?" "She asked questions. She wanted to know everything about you. I guess she asked me 1,000 questions. She wanted to know how you looked, how you were doing in your courses, where you were during vacation, if you had a girl, oh, everything. And finally she asked if you ever talked about her." "What did you say?" Hugh demanded breathlessly. "I told her yes, of course. Gee, Hugh, I thought she was going to cry. We talked some more, all about you. She's crazy about you, Hugh. I'm sure of it. And I think that's why she's been hitting the high spots. I felt sorry as the devil for her. Poor kid. Gee, that's tough. That's damn tough. Did she send me any message?" "No. I asked her if she wanted to send her love or anything, and she said she guessed not. I think she's having an awful time, Hugh." That talk tore Hugh's peace of mind into quivering shreds. Cynthia was with him every waking minute, and with her a sense of guilt that would not down. He knew that if he wrote to her, he might involve himself in a very difficult situation, but the temptation was stronger than his discretion. He wanted to know if Norry was right, and he knew that he would never have an hour's real comfort until he found out. Cynthia had told him that she was not in love with him. She had said definitely that their attraction for each other was merely sexual. Had she lied to him? Had she gone home in the middle of prom week because she thought she ought to save him from herself? He couldn't decide, and he felt that he had to know. If Cynthia was unhappy and he was the cause of her unhappiness, he wanted, he assured himself, to do the right thing. And he had very vague notions indeed of what the right thing might be. Finally, he wrote to her. The letter took him hours to write, but he flattered himself that it was very discreet. It implied nothing and demanded nothing. Dear Cynthia, I had a talk with Norrie Parker recently that has troubled me a great deal. He said that you seemed both unwell and unhappy, and he felt that I was in some way responsible for your depression. Of course, we both know how ingenuous and romantic Norrie is. He could find tragedy in a cut finger. I recognize that fact, but what he told me has given me no end of worry just the same. Won't you please write to me just what is wrong, if anything really is, and if I have anything to do with it? I shall continue to worry until I get your letter. Most sincerely, Hugh. Weeks went by and no answer came. Hugh's confusion increased. He thought of writing her another letter, but pride and common sense forbade. Then her letter came, and all of his props were kicked suddenly from under him. "Oh, my dear," she wrote. "I swore that I wouldn't answer your letter, and here I am doing it. I've fought and fought and fought until I can't fight any longer. I've held out as long as I can. Oh, Hugh, my dearest, I love you. I can't help it. I do. I do. I've tried so hard not to, and when I found that I couldn't help it, I swore that I would never let you know, because I knew that you didn't love me and that I am bad for you. I thought I loved you enough to give you up, and I might have succeeded if you hadn't written to me. Oh, Hugh, dearest, I nearly fainted when I saw your letter. I hardly dared open it. I just looked and looked at your beloved handwriting. I cried when I did read it. I thought of the letters you used to write to me, and this one was so different, so cold and impersonal. It hurt me dreadfully. I said that I wouldn't answer it. I swore that I wouldn't, and then I read your old letters. I've kept every one of them, and looked at your picture, and tonight you just seemed to be here. I could see your sweet smile and feel your dear arms around me. And Hugh, my darling, I had to write. I had to. My pride is all gone. I can't think any more. You are all that matters. Oh, Hugh, dearest, I love you so damned hard. Cynthia. 2 hours after the letter arrived, it was followed by a telegram. Don't pay any attention to my letter. I was crazy when I wrote it. Hugh had sense enough to pay no attention to the telegram. He tossed it into the fireplace and reread the letter. What could he do? What should he do? He was torn by doubt and confusion. He looked at her picture, and all his old longing for her returned. But he had learned to distrust that longing. He had got along for a year without her. He had almost ceased thinking of her when Norrie brought her back to his mind. He had to answer her letter. What could he say? He paced the floor of his room, ran his hands through his hair, pounded his forehead, but no solution came. He took a long walk into the country and came back more confused than ever. He was flattered by her letter, moved by it. He tried to persuade himself that he loved her as she loved him, and he could not do it. His passion for her was no longer overpowering, and no amount of thinking could make it so. In the end, he temporized. His letter was brief. Dear Cynthia, there is no need, I guess, to tell you that your letter swept me clean off my feet. I am still dizzy with confusion. I don't know what to say, and I have decided that it is best for me not to say anything until I know my own mind. I couldn't be fair either to you or myself otherwise, and I want to be fair. I must be. Give me time, please. It is because I care so much for you that I ask it. Don't worry if you don't hear from me for weeks. My silence won't mean that I have forgotten you. It will mean that I am thinking of you. Sincerely, Hugh. Her answer came promptly. Hugh, my dear, I was a fish to write that letter, and I know that I'll never forgive myself, but I couldn't help it. I just couldn't help it. I am glad that you are keeping your head because I've lost mine entirely. Take all the time you like. Do you hate me for losing my pride? I do. Your stupid Cynthia. Weeks went by, and Hugh found no solution. He damned college with all his heart and soul. What good had it done him anyway? Here he was with a serious problem on his hands, and he couldn't solve it any better than he could have when he was a freshman. 4 years of studying and lectures and examinations, and the first time he bucked up against a bit of life, he was licked. Eventually, he wrote to her and told her that he was fonder of her than he was of any girl that he had ever known, but that he didn't know whether he was in love with her or not. I have learned to distrust my own emotions, he wrote, and my own decisions. The more I think, the more bewildered I become. I am afraid to ask you to marry me for fear that I'll wreck both our lives, and I'm afraid not to ask you for the same reason. Do you think that time will solve our problem? I don't know. I don't know anything. She replied that she was willing to wait just so long as they continued to correspond. She said that she could no longer bear not to hear from him. So they wrote to each other, and the tangle of their relations became more hopelessly knotted. Cynthia never sent another letter so unguarded as her first, but she made no pretense of hiding her love. As Hugh sank deeper and deeper into the bog of confusion and distress, his contempt for his college education increased. One night in May, he expressed that contempt to a small group of seniors. "College is bunk," said Hugh sternly, "pure bunk. They tell us that we learn to think. Rot. I haven't learned to think. A child can solve a simple human problem as well as I can. College has played hell with me. I came here 4 years ago, a darned nice kid, if I do say so myself. I was chock full of ideals and illusions. Well, college has smashed most of those ideals and knocked the illusions plumb to hell. I thought, for example, that all college men were gentlemen. Well, most of them aren't. I thought that all of them were intelligent and hard students." The group broke into loud laughter. "Me too," said George Winsor when the noise had abated. "I thought that I was coming to a regular educational heaven, halls of learning and all that sort of thing. Why, it's a farce. Here I am sporting a Phi Beta key, an honor student, if you please, and all that I really know as a result of my college education is the fine points of football and how to play poker. I don't really know one damn thing about anything." The other men were Jack Lawrence and Pudge Jamieson. Jack was an earnest chap, serious and hard-working, but without a trace of brilliance. He, too, wore a Phi Beta Kappa key, and so did Pudge. Hugh was the only one of the group who had not won that honor. The fact that he was the only one who had won a letter was hardly, he felt, complete justification. His legs no longer seemed more important than his brains. In fact, when he had sprained a tendon and been forced to drop track, he had been genuinely pleased. Pudge was quite as plump as he had been as a freshman, and quite as jovial, but he did not tell so many smutty stories. He still persisted in crossing his knees in spite of the difficulties involved. When Winsor finished speaking, Pudge forced his legs into his favorite position for them and then twinkled at Winsor through his glasses. "Right you are, George," he said in his quick way. "I wear a Phi Beta key, too. We both belong to the world's greatest intellectual fraternity. But what in hell do we know? We've all majored in English except Jack, and I'll bet any one of us can give the others an exam offhand that they can't pass. I'm going to law school. I hope to God that I learn something there. I certainly don't feel that I know anything now as a result of my 4 years of higher education." "Well, if you fellows feel that way," said Hugh mournfully, "how do you suppose I feel? I made my first really good record last term, and that wasn't any world beater. I've learned how to gamble and smoke and drink and pet in college, but that's about all that I have learned. I'm not as fine as I was when I came here. I've been coarsened and cheapened. All of us have. I take things for granted that shocked me horribly once. I know that they ought to shock me now, but they don't. I've made some friends and I've had a wonderful time, but I certainly don't feel that I have got any other value out of college." Winsor could not sit still and talk. He filled his pipe viciously, lighted it, and then jumped up and leaned against the mantel. "I admit everything that's been said, but I don't believe that it is altogether our fault." He was intensely in earnest, and so were his listeners. "Look at the faculty. When I came here, I thought that they were all wise men because they were on the faculty. Well, I've found out otherwise. Some of them know a lot and can't teach. A few of them know a lot and can teach. Some of them know a little and can't teach, and some of them don't know anything and can't explain CAT. Why, look at Kempton. That freshman Larson showed me a theme the other day that Kempton had corrected. It was full of errors that weren't marked, and it was nothing in the world but drip. Even Larson knew that, but he's the foxy kid. He wrote the theme about Kempton. All right, Kempton gives him a B and tells him that it is very amusing. Hell of a lot Larson's learning. Look at Kane in math. I had him when I was a freshman." "Me too," Hugh chimed in. "'Nuff said then. Math's dry enough, God knows, but Kane makes it dryer. He's a born desiccator. He could make Hamlet as dry as calculus." "Right-o," said Pudge, "but Mitchell could make calculus as exciting as Hamlet. It's 50-50. And they fired Mitchell." Jack Lawrence spoke for the first time. "I have that straight. The administration seems afraid of a man that can teach. They've made Buchanan a full professor, and there isn't a man in college who can tell what he's talking about. He's written a couple of books that nobody reads, and that makes him a scholar. I was forced to take 3 courses with him. They were agony, and he never taught me a damn thing." "Most of them don't teach you a damn thing," Winsor exclaimed, tapping his pipe on the mantel. "They either tell you something that you can find more easily in a book, or just confuse you with a lot of ponderous lectures that put you to sleep, or drive you crazy if you try to understand them. There are just about a dozen men in this college worth listening to," Hugh put in, "and I've got 3 of them this term. I'm learning more than I did in my whole 3 first years. Let's be fair, though. We're blaming it all on the profs, and you know damn well that we don't study. All we try to do is to get by. I don't mean you Phi Betas. I mean all the rest of us. And if we can put anything over on the profs, we are tickled pink. We're like a lot of little kids in grammar school. Just look at the cheating that goes on, the copying of themes and the cribbing. It's rotten." Winsor started to protest, but Hugh rushed on. "Oh, I know that the majority of the fellows don't consciously cheat. I'm talking about the copying of math problems, and the using of trots, and the paraphrasing of literary digest articles for themes, and all that sort of thing. If more than half of the fellows don't do that sort of thing sometime or other in college, I'll eat my hat. And we all know darned well that we aren't supposed to do it, but the majority of fellows cheat in some way or other before they graduate. We aren't so much. Do you remember, George, what Jimmy Henley said to us when we were sophomores in English 36? He laid us out cold, said that we were as standardized as Fords and that we were ashamed of anything intellectual. Well, he was right. Do you remember how he ended by saying that if we were the cream of the earth, he felt sorry for the skimmed milk, or something like that? Sure, I remember, Winsor replied, running his fingers through his rusty hair. He certainly pulled a heavy line that day. He was right, too. I'll tell you what, exclaimed Pudge suddenly, so suddenly that his crossed legs parted company and his foot fell heavily to the floor. Let's put it up to Henley in class tomorrow. Let's ask him straight out if he thinks college is worthwhile. He'll hedge, objected Lawrence. All the profs do if you ask them anything like that. Winsor laughed. You don't know Jimmy Henley. He won't hedge. You've never had a class with him, but Hugh and Pudge and I are all in English 53, and we'll put it up to him. He'll tell us what he thinks all right, and I hope to God that he says it is worthwhile. I'd like to have somebody convince me that I've got something out of these 4 years beside lower ideals. Hell, sometimes I think that we're all damn fools. We worship athletics. No offense, Hugh. Above everything else. We gamble and drink and talk like bums, and about every so often some fellow has to go home because a lovely lady has left him with bitter, bitter memories. I'm with Henley. If we're the cream of the earth, well, thank the Lord we're not. Who is? Lawrence asked earnestly. God knows. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of The Plastic Age by Percy Marks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. English 53 had only a dozen men in it, so Henley conducted the course in a very informal fashion. The men felt free to bring up for discussion any topic that interested them. Nobody was surprised, therefore, when George Winsor asked Henley to express his opinion of the value of a college education. He reminded Henley of what he had said 2 years before and rapidly gave a resume of the discussion that resulted in the question he was asking. We'd like to know, too, he concluded, grinning wickedly, just whom you consider the cream of the earth. You remember you said that if we were, you felt sorry for the skimmed milk. Henley leaned back in his chair and laughed. Yes, he said, I remember saying that. I didn't think, though, that you would remember it for 2 years. You seem to remember most of what I said. I am truly astonished. He grinned back at Winsor. The swine seemed to have eaten the pearls. The class laughed, but Winsor was not one to refuse the gambit. They are very indigestible, he said quickly. Good, Henley exclaimed. I wanted them to give you a bellyache, and I am delighted that you still suffer. We do, Pudge Jamieson admitted, but we'd like to have a little mercy shown to us now. We've spent 4 years here, and while we've enjoyed them, we've just about made up our minds that they have been all in all wasted years. No. Henley was decisive. His playful manner entirely disappeared. No, not wasted. You have enjoyed them, you say. Splendid justification. You will continue to enjoy them as the years grow between you and your college days. All men are sentimental about college, and in that sentimentality there is continuous pleasure. Your doubt delights me. Your feeling that you haven't learned anything delights me too. It proves that you have learned a great deal. It is only the ignoramus who thinks he is wise. The wise man knows that he is an ignoramus. That's a platitude, but it is nonetheless true. I have cold comfort for you. The more you learn, the less confident you will be of your own learning, the more utterly ignorant you will feel. I have never known so much as the day I graduated from high school. I held my diploma and the knowledge of the ages in my hand. I had never heard of Socrates, but I would have challenged him to a debate without the slightest fear. Since then I have grown more humble, so humble that there are times when I am ashamed to come into the classroom. What right have I to teach anybody anything? I mean that quite sincerely. Then I remember that, ignorant as I am, the undergraduates are more ignorant. I take heart and mount the rostrum, ready to speak with the authority of a pundit." He realized that he was sliding off on a tangent and paused to find a new attack. Pudge Jamieson helped him. "I suppose that's all true," he said, "but it doesn't explain why college is really worthwhile. The fact remains that most of us don't learn anything, that we are coarsened by college, and that we worship false gods." Henley nodded in agreement. "It would be hard to deny your assertions," he acknowledged, "and I don't think that I am going to try to deny them. Of course, men grow coarser while they are in college, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't grow coarser if they weren't in college. It isn't college that coarsens a man and destroys his illusions. It is life. Don't think that you can grow to manhood and retain your pretty dreams. You have become disillusioned about college. In the next few years you will suffer further disillusionment. That is the price of living. Every intelligent man with ideals eventually becomes a cynic. It is inevitable. He has standards, and granted that he is intelligent, he cannot fail to see how far mankind falls below those standards. The result is cynicism. And if he is truly intelligent, the cynicism is kindly. Having learned that man is frail, he expects little of him. Therefore, if he judges at all, his judgment is tempered either with humor or with mercy. The dozen boys were sprawled lazily in their chairs, their feet resting on the rungs of the chairs before them, but their eyes were fastened keenly on Henley. All that he was saying was of the greatest importance to them. They found comfort in his words, but the comfort raised new doubts, new problems. "How does that affect college?" Winsor asked. "It affects it very decidedly," Henley replied. "You haven't become true cynics yet. You expect too much of college. You forget that the men who run the college and the men who attend it are at best human beings, and that means that very much cannot be expected of them. You do worship false gods. I find hope in the fact that you recognize the stuff of which your gods are made. I have great hopes for the American colleges, not because I have any reason to believe that the faculties will become wiser or that the administrations will lead the students to true gods. Not at all. But I do think that the students themselves will find a way. They have already abandoned mammon, at least the most intelligent have, and I begin to see signs of less adoration for athletics. Athletics, of course, have their place, and some of the students are beginning to find that place. Certainly the alumni haven't, and I don't believe that the administrative officers have either. Just so long as athletes advertise the college, the administrations will coddle them. The undergraduates, however, show signs of frowning on professionalism, and the stupid athlete is rapidly losing his prestige. An athlete has to show something more than brawn to be a hero among his fellows nowadays." He paused, and Pudge spoke up. "Perhaps you are right," he said, "but I doubt it. Athletics are certainly far more important to us than anything else, and the captain of the football team is always the biggest man in college. But I don't care particularly about that. What I want to know is how the colleges justify their existence. I don't see that you have proved that they do." "No, I haven't," Henley admitted, "and I don't know that I can prove it. Of course the colleges aren't perfect, not by a long way, but as human institutions go, I think they justify their existence. The 4 years spent at college by an intelligent boy, please notice that I say intelligent, are well spent indeed. They are gloriously worthwhile. You said that you have had a wonderful time. Not so wonderful as you think. It is a strange feeling that we have about our college years. We all believe that they are years of unalloyed happiness, and the further we leave them behind, the more perfect they seem. As a matter of fact, few undergraduates are truly happy. They are going through a period of storm and stress. They are torn by Weltschmerz. Show me a 19-year-old boy who is perfectly happy, and you show me an idiot. I rarely get a cheerful theme except from freshmen. 9/10 of them are expressions of deep concern and distress. A boy's college years are the years when he finds out that life isn't what he thought it, and the finding out is a painful experience. He discovers that he and his fellows are made of very brittle clay. Usually he loathes himself. Often he loathes his fellows. College isn't the Elysium that it is painted in stories and novels. But I feel sorry for any intelligent man who didn't have the opportunity to go to college. There is something beautiful about one's college days, something that one treasures all his life. As we grow older, we forget the hours of storm and stress, the classroom humiliations, the terror of examinations, the awful periods of doubt of God and man. We forget everything but athletic victories, long discussions with friends, campus sings, fraternity life, moonlight on the campus, and everything that is romantic. The sting dies, and the beauty remains. Why do men give large sums of money to their colleges when asked? Because they want to help society? Not at all. The average man doesn't even take that into consideration. He gives the money because he loves his alma mater, because he has beautiful and tender memories of her. No, colleges are far from perfect, tragically far from it, but any institution that commands loyalty and love as colleges do cannot be wholly imperfect. There is a virtue in a college that uninspired administrative officers, stupid professors, and alumni with false ideals cannot kill. At times I tremble for Sanford College. There are times when I swear at it, but I never cease to love it. If you feel that way about college, why did you say those things to us 2 years ago? Hugh asked. Because they were true, all true. I was talking about the undergraduates then, and I could have said much more cutting things and still been on the safe side of the truth. There is, however, another side, and that is what I am trying to give you now. Rather incoherently, I know. Hugh thought of Cynthia. I suppose all that you say is true, he admitted dubiously. But I can't feel that college does what it should for us. We are told that we are taught to think, but the minute we bump up against a problem in living, we are stumped just as badly as we were when we were freshmen. Oh no, not at all. You solve problems every day that would have stumped you hopelessly as a freshman. You think better than you did 4 years ago, but no college, however perfect, can teach you all the solutions of life. There are no nostrums or cure-alls that the colleges can give for all the ills and sicknesses of life. You, I am afraid, will have to doctor those yourself. I see. Hugh didn't altogether see. Both college and life seemed more complicated than he had thought them. I am curious to know, he added, just whom you consider the cream of the earth. That expression has stuck in my mind. I don't know why, but it has. Henley smiled, probably because it is such a very badly mixed metaphor. Well, I consider the college man the cream of the earth. What? 4 of the men exclaimed, and all of them sat suddenly upright. Yes, but let me explain. If I remember rightly, I said that if you were the cream of the earth, I hoped that God would pity the skimmed milk. Well, everything taken into consideration, I do think that you are the cream of the earth, and I have no hope for the skimmed milk. Perhaps it isn't wise for me to give public expression to my pessimism, but you ought to be old enough to stand it. The average college graduate is a pretty poor specimen, but all in all he is just about the best we have. Please remember that I am talking in averages. I know perfectly well that a great many brilliant men do not come to college, and that a great many stupid men do come, but the colleges get a very fair percentage of the intelligent ones and a comparatively small percentage of the stupid ones. In other words, to play with my mixed metaphor a bit, the cream is very thin in places and the skim milk has some very thick clots of cream. But in the end, the cream remains the cream and the milk the milk. Everything taken into consideration, we get in the colleges the young men with the highest ideals, the loftiest purpose. You want to tell me that those ideals are low and the purpose materialistic and selfish. I know it, but the average college graduate, I repeat, has loftier ideals and is less materialistic than the average man who has not gone to college. I wish that I could believe that the college gives him those ideals. I can't, however. The colleges draw the best that society has to offer. Therefore, they graduate the best. "Oh, I don't know," a student interrupted. "How about Edison and Ford and Shakespeare and Sophocles?" Henley concluded for him. "Edison is an inventive genius, and Ford is a business genius. Genius hasn't anything to do with schools. The colleges, however, could have made both Ford and Edison bigger men, though they couldn't have made them lesser geniuses. No, we must not take the exceptional man as a standard. We've got to talk about the average. The hand of the potter shook badly when he made man. It was at best a careless job, but he made some better than others, some a little less weak, a little more intelligent. All in all, those are the men that come to college. The colleges ought to do 1,000 times more for those men than they do, but after all, they do something for them, and I am optimistic enough to believe that the time will come when they will do more. Some day, perhaps," he concluded very seriously, "our administrative officers will be true educators. Some day, perhaps, our faculties will be wise men really fitted to teach. Some day, perhaps, our students will be really students eager to learn, honest searchers after beauty and truth. That day will be the millennium. I look for the undergraduates to lead us to it." End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of The Plastic Age by Percy Marks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The college year swept rapidly to its close, so rapidly to the seniors that the days seemed to melt in their grasp. The 20th of June would bring them their diplomas and the end of their college life. They felt a bit chesty at the thought of that B.S. or A.B., but a little sentimental at the thought of leaving old Sanford. Suddenly, everything about the college became infinitely precious. Every tradition, every building, no matter how ugly, even the professors, not just the deserving few, all of them. Hugh took to wandering about the campus, sometimes alone, thinking of Cynthia, sometimes with a favored crony such as George Winsor or Pudge Jamieson. He didn't see very much of Norry the last month or two of college. He was just as fond of him as ever. But Norry was only a junior. He would not understand how a fellow felt about Sanford when he was on the verge of leaving her. But George and Pudge did understand. The boys didn't say much as they wandered around the buildings, merely strolled along, occasionally pausing to laugh over some experience that had happened to one of them in the building they were passing. Hugh could never pass Surrey Hall without feeling something deeper than sentimentality. He always thought of Carl Peters, from whom he had not heard for more than a year. He understood Carl better now, his desire to be a gentleman and his despair at ever succeeding. Surrey Hall held drama for Hugh, not all of it pleasant, but he had a deeper affection for the ivy-covered dormitory than he would ever have for the new Delta house. He wondered what had become of Morse, the homesick freshman. Poor Morse! And the bowl sessions he had sat in Old Surrey. He had learned a lot from them, a whole lot. The chapel where he had slept and surreptitiously eaten doughnuts and read the Sanford News suddenly became a holy building, the building that housed the soul of Sanford. He knew that he was sentimental, that he was investing buildings with a greater significance than they had in their own right, but he continued to dream over the last 4 years and to find a melancholy beauty in his own sentimentality. If it hadn't been for Cynthia, he would have been perfectly happy. Soon the examinations were over, and the underclassmen began to depart. Goodbye to all his friends who were not seniors. Goodbye to Norrie Parker. Thanks for the congratulations, old man. Sorry I can't visit you this summer. Can you spend a month with me on the farm? Goodbye to his fraternity brothers, except the few left in his own delegation. Goodbye, old man. Goodbye. Sure, I'll see you next year at the reunion. Goodbye. Goodbye. Sad, this business of saying goodbye. Damn sad. Gee, how a fellow would miss all the good old eggs he had walked with and drunk with and bowled with these past years. Good eggs, all of them. Damn good eggs. God, a fellow couldn't appreciate college until he was about to leave it. Oh, for a chance to live those 4 years over again. Would I live them differently? I'll say I would. Goodbye, boyhood. Commencement was coming. Hugh hadn't thought before of what that word meant. Commencement, the beginning. What was he going to do with this commencement of his into life? Old Pudge was going to law school, and so was Jack Lawrence. George Winsor was going to medical school. But what was he going to do? He felt so pathetically unprepared. And then there was Cynthia. What was he going to do about her? She rarely left his mind. How could he tackle life when he couldn't solve the problem she presented? It was like trying to run 100 against fast men when a fellow had only begun to train. Henley had advised him to take a year or so at Harvard if his father proved willing, and his father was more than willing, even eager. He guessed that he'd take at least a year in Cambridge. Perhaps he could find himself in that year. Maybe he could learn to write. He hoped to God he could. Just before commencement, his relations with Cynthia came to a climax. They had been constantly becoming more complicated. She was demanding nothing of him, but her letters were tinged with despair. He felt at last that he must see her. Then he would know whether he loved her or not. A year before, she had said that he didn't. How did she know? She had said that all he felt for her was sex attraction. How did she know that? Why, she had said that was all that she felt for him, and he had heard plenty of fellows argue that love was nothing but sexual attraction anyway, and that all the stuff the poets wrote was pure bunk. Freud said something like that, he thought, and Freud knew a damn sight more about it than the poets. Yet the doubt remained. Whether love was merely sexual attraction or not, he wanted something more than that. His every instinct demanded something more. He had noticed another thing. The fellows that weren't engaged said that love was only sexual attraction. Those who were engaged vehemently denied it. And Hugh knew that some of the engaged men, had led gay lives in college. He could not reach any decision. At times he was sure that what he felt for Cynthia was love. At other times he was sure that it wasn't. At last, in desperation, he telegraphed to her that he was coming to New York and that she should meet him at Grand Central at 3 o'clock the next day. He knew that he oughtn't to go. He would be able to stay in New York only a little more than 2 hours because his father and mother would arrive in Haydensville the day following, and he felt that he had to be there to greet them. He damned himself for his impetuousness all during the long trip, and a dozen times he wished he were back safe in the Nu Delta house. What in hell would he say to Cynthia anyway? What would he do when he saw her? Kiss her? I won't have a damn bit of sense left if I do. She was waiting for him as he came through the gate. Quite without thinking, he put down his bag and kissed her. Her touch had its old power. His blood leaped. With a tremendous effort of will, he controlled himself. That afternoon was all important. He must keep his head. "It's sweet of you to come," Cynthia whispered, clinging to him. "So damned sweet." "It's damned good to see you," he replied gruffly. "Come on while I check this bag." "I've only got a little over 2 hours, Cynthia. I've got to get the 5:10 back. My folks will be in Haydensville tomorrow morning, and I've got to get back to meet them." Her face clouded for an instant, but she tucked her arm gaily in his and marched with him across the rotunda to the checking counter. When Hugh had disposed of his bag, he suggested that they go to a little tea room on 57th Street. She agreed without argument. Once they were in a taxi, she wanted to snuggle down into his arm, but she restrained herself. She felt that she had to play fair. Hugh said nothing. He was trying to think, and his thoughts whirled around in a mad, drunken dance. He believed that he would be married before he took the train back, at least engaged. And what would all that mean? Did he want to get married? God, he didn't know. When at last they were settled in a corner of the empty tea room and had given their order, they talked in an embarrassed fashion about their recent letters, both of them carefully quiet and restrained. Finally, Hugh shoved his plate and cup aside and looked straight at her for the first time. She was thin, much thinner than she had been a year ago. But there was something sweeter about her, too. She seemed so quiet, so gentle. "We aren't going to get anywhere this way, Cynthia," he said desperately. "We're both evading. I haven't any sense left, but what I say from now on, I'm going to say straight out. I swore on the train that I wouldn't kiss you. I knew that I wouldn't be able to think if I did, and I can't. All I know is that I want to kiss you again." He looked at her sitting across the little table from him, so slender and still, a different Cynthia, but damnably desirable. "Cynthia," he added hoarsely, "if you took my hand, you could lead me to hell." She in turn looked at him. He was much older than he had been a year before. Then he had been a boy. Now he seemed a man. He had not changed particularly. He was as blond and young and clean as ever. But there was something about his mouth and eyes, something more serious and more stern, that made him seem years older. "I don't want to lead you to hell, honey," she replied softly. "I left prom last year so that I wouldn't do that. I told you then that I wasn't good for you, but I'm different now. I can see that. I don't know what it is, but you're different, awfully different." He leaned forward suddenly. "Cynthia, shall we go over to Jersey and get married? I understand that one can there right away. We're both of age." "Wait, Hugh, wait." Cynthia's hands were tightly clasped in her lap. "Are you sure that you want to? I've been thinking a lot since I got your telegram. Are you sure you love me?" He slumped back into his chair. I don't know what love is," he confessed miserably. "I can't find out." Cynthia's hands tightened in her lap. "I've tried to think this business out, and I can't. I haven't any right to ask you to marry me. I haven't any money, not a bit, and I'm not prepared to do anything either. As I wrote you, my folks want me to go to Harvard next year." The mention of his poverty and of his inability to support a wife brought him back to something approaching normal again. "I suppose I'm just a kid, Cynthia," he began more quietly, "but sometimes I feel 1,000 years old. I do right now. What were your plans for next year and after that, until you saw me?" Her eyes searched his. "Oh, I thought I'd go to Harvard a year or two and then try to write or perhaps teach. Writing is slow business, I understand, and teaching doesn't pay anything. I don't want to ask my father to support us, and I won't let your folks. I lost my head when I suggested that we get married. It would be foolish. I haven't the right." "No," she agreed slowly. "No, neither of us has the right. I thought before you came, if you asked me to marry you, I was sure somehow that you would. I would run right off and do it. But now I know that I won't." She continued to gaze at him, her eyes troubled and confused. What made him seem so much older, so different? "Do you think we can ever forget prom?" She waited for his reply. So much depended on it. "Of course," he answered impatiently. "I've forgotten that already. We were crazy kids, that's all. Youngsters trying to act smart and wild." "Oh." The ejaculation was soft, but it vibrated with pain. "You mean that you wouldn't you wouldn't get drunk like that again?" "Of course not, especially at a dance. I'm not a child any longer, Cynthia. I have sense enough now not to forfeit my self-respect again. I hope so, anyway. I haven't been drunk in the last year. A drunkard is a beastly sight, rotten. If I have learned anything in college, it is that a man has to respect himself, and I can't respect anyone any longer who deliberately reduces himself to a beast. I was a beast with you a year ago. I treated you like a woman of the streets, and I abused Norrie Parker's hospitality shamefully. If I can help it, I'll never act like a rotter again. I hate a prig, Cynthia, like the devil, but I hate a rotter even more. I hope I can learn to be neither." As he spoke, Cynthia clenched her hands so tightly that the fingernails were bruising her tender palms. But her eyes remained dry, and her lips did not tremble. If he could have seen her on some parties this last year. "You have changed a lot." Her words were barely audible. "You have changed an awful lot." He smiled. "I hope so. There are times now when I hate myself, but I never hate myself so much as when I think of prom. I've learned a lot in the last year, and I hope I've learned enough to treat a decent girl decently. I have never apologized to you the way I think I ought to." "Don't!" she cried, her voice vibrant with pain. "Don't! I was more to blame than you were. Let's not talk about that." "All right. I'm more than willing to forget it." He paused and then continued very seriously. "I can't ask you to marry me now, Cynthia, but are you willing to wait for me? It may take time, but I promise I'll work hard." Cynthia's hands clenched convulsively. "No, Hugh, honey," she whispered. "I'll never marry you. I don't love you." "What?" he demanded, his senses swimming in hopeless confusion. "What?" She did not say that she knew that he did not love her. She did not tell him how much his quixotic chivalry moved her. Nor did she tell him that she knew only too well that she could lead him to hell, as he said, but that was the only place that she could lead him. These things she felt positive of, but to mention them meant an argument, and an argument would have been unendurable. "No," she repeated, "I don't love you. You see, you're so different from what I remembered. You've grown up and you've changed. Why, Hugh, we're strangers. I've realized that while you've been talking. We don't know each other, not a bit. We only saw each other for a week, summer before last, and for 2 days last spring. Now we're two altogether different people, and we don't know each other at all." She prayed that he would deny her statements, that he would say they knew each other by instinct. Anything, so long as he did not agree. "I certainly don't know you the way you're talking now," he said almost roughly, his pride hurt and his mind in a turmoil. "I know that we don't know each other, but I never thought that you thought that mattered." Her hands clenched more tightly for an instant and then lay open and limp in her lap. Her lips were trembling, so she smiled. "I didn't think it mattered until you asked me to marry you. Then I knew it did. It was game of you to offer to take a chance, but I'm not that game. I couldn't marry a strange man. I like that man a lot, but I don't love him. And you don't want me to marry you if I don't love you, do you, Hugh?" "Of course not." He looked down in earnest thought and then said softly, his eyes on the table, "I'm glad that you feel that way, Cynthia." She bit her lip and trembled slightly. "I'll confess now that I don't think that I love you either. You sweep me clean off my feet when I'm with you, but when I'm away from you, I don't feel that way. I think love must be something more than we feel for each other." He looked up and smiled boyishly. "We'll go on being friends anyhow, won't we?" Somehow she managed to smile back at him. "Of course," she whispered, and then after a brief pause added, "We had better go now. Your train will be leaving pretty soon." Hugh pulled out his watch. "By jingo, so it will." He called the waiter, paid his bill, and a few minutes later they turned into Fifth Avenue. They had gone about a block down the avenue when Hugh saw someone a few feet ahead of him who looked familiar. Could it be Carl Peters? By the Lord Harry, it was. "Excuse me a minute, Cynthia, please. There's a fellow I know." He rushed forward and caught Carl by the arm. Carl cried, "Hugh, by God!" and shook hands with him violently. "Hell, Hugh, I'm glad to see you." Hugh turned to Cynthia, who was a pace behind them. He introduced Carl and Cynthia to each other and then asked Carl why in the devil he hadn't written. Carl switched his leg with his cane and grinned. "You know darn well, Hugh, that I don't write letters, but I did mean to write to you. I meant to, often. I've been traveling. My mother and I have just got back from a trip around the world." "Where are you going now?" "Oh, golly," Hugh exclaimed. "I've got to hurry if I'm going to make that train. Come on, Carl, with us to Grand Central. I've got to get the 5:10 back to Haydensville. My folks are coming up tomorrow for commencement." Instantly he hated himself. Why did he have to mention commencement? He might have remembered that it should have been Carl's commencement, too. Carl, however, did not seem in the least disturbed, and he cheerfully accompanied Hugh and Cynthia to the station. He looked at Cynthia and had an idea. "Have you checked your bag?" "Yes," Hugh replied. "Well, give me the check and I'll get it for you. I'll meet you at the gate." Hugh surrendered the check and then proceeded to the gate with Cynthia. He turned to her and asked gently, "May I kiss you, Cynthia?" For an instant she looked down and said nothing. Then she turned her face up to his. He kissed her tenderly, wondering why he felt no passion, afraid that he would. "Good-bye, Cynthia, dear," he whispered. Her hands fluttered helplessly about his coat lapels and then fell to her side. She managed a brave little smile. "Good-bye, honey." Carl rushed up with the bag. "Gosh, Hugh, you've got to hurry. they're closing the gate." He gripped his hand for a second. "Visit me at Bar Harbor this summer if you can." "Sure. Goodbye, old man. Goodbye, Cynthia. Goodbye. Goodbye." Hugh slipped through the gate and turned to wave at Carl and Cynthia. They waved back, and then he ran for the train. On the long trip to Haydensville, Hugh relaxed. Now that the strain was over, he felt suddenly weak, but it was sweet weakness. He could graduate in peace now. The visit to New York had been worthwhile. And what do you know, bumping into old Carl like that? Cynthia and he were friends, too, the best friends in the world, but she no longer wanted to marry him. That was fine. He remembered the picture she and Carl had made standing on the other side of the gate from him. What a peach of a pair. Golly, wouldn't it be funny if they hit it off? He thought over every word that he and Cynthia had said. She certainly had been square all right. Not many like her. But by heaven, I knew down in my heart all the time that I didn't want to get married or even engaged. It would have played hell with everything. End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of The Plastic Age by Percy Marks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The next morning, Hugh's mother and father arrived in the automobile. He was to drive them back to Marytown the day after commencement. At last he stood in the doorway of the new Delta house and welcomed his father. But he had forgotten all about that youthful dream. He was merely aware that he was enormously glad to see the folks, and that his father seemed to be withering into an old man. As the underclassmen departed, the alumni began to arrive. The 5-year classes dressed in extraordinary outfits. Indians, Turks, and men in prison garb roamed the campus. There were youngsters just a year out of college, still looking like undergraduates, still full of college talk. The alumni ranged all the way from these 1-year men to the 50-year men, 12 old men who had come back to Sanford 50 years after their graduation, and 2 of them had come all the way across the continent. There had been only 50 men originally in that class, and 12 of them were back. What brought them back, Hugh wondered. He thought he knew, but he couldn't have given a reason. He watched those old men wandering slowly around the campus, one of them with his grandson who was graduating this year, and he was awed by their age and their devotion to their alma mater. Yes, Henley had been right. Sanford was far from perfect, far from it. A child could see that, but there was something in the college that gripped one's heart. What faults that old college had, but how one loved her. Thousands of Japanese lanterns had been strung around the campus. An electric fountain sparkled and splashed its many-colored waters. A band seemed to be playing every hour of the day and night from the bandstand in front of the Union. It was a gay scene, and everybody seemed superbly happy, except possibly the seniors. They pretended to be happy, but all of them were a little sad, a little frightened. College had been very beautiful, and the world outside, what was it? What did it have in store for them? There were mothers and fathers there to see their sons receive their degrees. There were the wives and children of the alumni. There were sisters and fiancées of the seniors. Nearly 2,000 people, and at least half of the alumni drunk most of the time. Very drunk, many of them, and very foolish, but nobody minded. Somehow everyone seemed to realize that in a few brief days they were trying to recapture a youthful thrill that had gone forever. Some of the drunken ones seemed very silly. Some of them seemed almost offensive. All of them were pathetic. They had come back to Sanford where they had once been so young and exuberant, so tireless in pleasure, so in love with living, and they were trying to pour all that youthful zest into themselves again out of a bottle bought from a bootlegger. Were they having a good time? Who knows? Probably not. A bald-headed man does not particularly enjoy looking at a picture taken in his hirsute youth, and yet there is a certain whimsical pleasure in the memories the picture brings. For 3 days there was much gaiety, much singing of class songs, constant parading, dances, speech-making, class circuses, and endless shaking of hands and exchanging of reminiscences. The seniors moved through all the excitement quietly, keeping close to their relatives and friends. Graduation wasn't so thrilling as they had expected it to be. It was more sad. The alumni seemed to be having a good time. They were ridiculously boyish. Only the seniors were grave, strangely and unnaturally dignified. Most of the alumni left the night before the graduation exercises. The parents and fiancés remained. They stood in the middle of the campus and watched the seniors, clad in caps and gowns, line up before the union at the orders of the class marshal. Finally, the procession. A grand marshal, a professor, in the lead with a wand in his hand. Then President Culver and the governor of the state. Then the men who were to receive honorary degrees. A writer, a college president, a philanthropist, a professor, and 3 politicians. Then the faculty in academic robes, their many-colored hoods brilliant against their black gowns. And last, the seniors, a long line of them marching in twos, headed by their marshal. The visitors streamed after them into the chapel. The seniors sat in their customary seats, the faculty and the men who were to receive honorary degrees, on a platform that had been built at the altar. After they were seated, everything became a blur to Hugh. He hardly knew what was happening. He saw his father and mother sitting in the transept. He thought his mother was crying. He hoped not. Someone prayed stupidly. There was a hymn. What was it Cynthia had said? Oh, yes, I can't marry a stranger. Well, they weren't exactly strangers. He was darn glad he had gone to New York. The president seemed to be saying over and over again, "By the power invested in me." And every time that he said it, Professor Blake would slip the loop of a colored hood over the head of a writer or a politician. And then it was happening all over again. Suddenly the class marshal motioned to the seniors to rise. They put on their mortar boards. The president said once more, "By the power invested in me." The seniors filed by the president, and the grand marshal handed each of them a roll of parchment tied with blue and orange ribbons. Hugh felt a strange thrill as he took his. He was graduated. He was a Bachelor of Science. Back again to their seats. Someone was pronouncing benediction. Music from the organ. Marching out of the chapel, the surge of friends. His father shaking his hand, his mother's arms around his neck. She was crying. Graduation was over, and with it Hugh's college days. Many of the seniors left at once. Hugh would have liked to go too, but his father wanted to stay 1 more day in Haydensville. Besides, there was a final senior dance that night, and he thought that Hugh ought to attend it. Hugh did go to the dance, but somehow it brought him no pleasure. Although it was immensely decorous, it reminded him of Cynthia. He thought of her tenderly, the best little girl he'd ever met. He danced on, religiously steering around the sisters and fiancées of his friends, but he could not enjoy the dance. Shortly after 11, he slipped out of the gymnasium and made one last tour of the campus. It was a moonlight night, and the campus was mysterious with shadows. The elms shook their leaves whisperingly. The tower of the chapel looked like magic tracery in the moonlight. He paused before Surrey Hall, now dark and empty. Good old Carl. Carl and Cynthia? He wondered. Pudge had roomed there, too. He passed on. Keller Hall. Cynthia and Norry. God, what a beast I was that night. How white Norry was, and Cynthia, too. Cynthia again. She'd always be a part of Sanford to him. On down to the lake to watch the silver path of the moonlight and the heavy reflections near the shore. Swimming, canoeing, skating. He and Cynthia in the woods beyond. On back to the campus, around the buildings, every one of them filled with memories. 4 years, 4 beautiful, wonderful years. Good old Sanford. Midnight struck. Someone turned a switch somewhere. The Japanese lanterns suddenly lost their colors and faded to gray balloons in the moonlight. Some men were singing on the Union steps. It was a few seniors, Hugh knew. They had been singing for an hour. He stood in the center of the campus and listened, his eyes full of tears. Earnestly, religiously, the men sang, their voices rich with emotion. Sanford, Sanford, mother of men, love us, guard us, hold us true. Let thy arms enfold us, let thy truth uphold us. Queen of colleges, mother of men. Alma mater, Sanford, hail. Alma mater, hail, hail. Hugh walked slowly across the campus toward the Nu Delta house. He was both happy and sad. Happy because the great adventure was before him, with all its mystery. Sad because he was leaving something beautiful behind. End of chapter 27. End of the Plastic Age by Percy Marks.